To cross over to our sister station, that is Spice FM, in the Situation Room, where they're having a conversation with the Law Society of Kenya President, Faith Odhiambo. And in this particular one, they're focusing on the law and the constitution, asking a major question. Do Kenyans have faith in authorities? My name is Anki Dorisombat. I'll meet you again at 10 a.m.
FM, Nairobi.
This democratic country that's governed by the rule of law, and the law is very clear. The lawyer, the president of the lawyers of the country is here. She's Faith Odhiambo, president of the Law Society of Kenya. We're talking about that, the rule of law, constitutionalism, and the place of that, the citizens versus those that govern them. And what you've just described from what you've seen as you go to try and represent people who have been arrested because of participating in the protests, as you go to help secure the release of those that have been abducted, and what you see and hear from them as you speak to them and you try to debrief them, and they are clearly traumatized, they have clearly been tortured. And then you look at the conversation that's coming from the government. Let's start with the Ministry for Interior, then going to the IG of police and the command of police. Do you hear anything of them acknowledging that they've done something wrong?
There's absolutely no acknowledgement. In fact, the last statement that C.S. Kindiki made, he was trying to illegally curtail the constitutional rights to picket. And that's all he spoke about, warning people. The IG, I think he has played a disappearing act. I don't remember listening to him saying anything. The head of state talks about, yes, people have died, but he's aware of 6 people. You know, the reality is, if we want to move this country to the next level and way forward to reconciliation, it must start with the justice of these victims. We cannot say that we're sweeping under the carpet. People being shot point blank, people who are not armed, they are with their water bottles. There's so much pictorial. And the same killer cop yesterday you saw shooting at journalists because they were taking his picture. He shoots a tear gas cannon at close range, and he does it in a callous way, like, I'm showing you I have power. And the fact that no action has been taken against him to date, irrespective of the president talking quite diplomatic. In fact, I was hearing some of the spaces, people were saying the first speech was for us Kenyans, the second one was for the international community. So there's totally mistrust with the current government, and because they speak one way and do something different, that's why Kenyans still do not believe, and that's why they were on the streets yesterday, and that's why they are planning again to come back on the streets, irrespective of the Kenya Defense Forces being deployed. Kenyans are saying that they are not going to relent because they do not trust the powers that be, that they will uphold the promises, because they still see the bloodshed and they say you won't kill us all. So we'll keep coming.
Are you saying, Madam President, that what we're seeing is there was an existing dissatisfaction either with the government or with the president or with the parliament or with the government? Because government, we forget, is executive, it's parliament, and it is the judiciary.
Let me tell you this. There's an existing disappointment with government. I would say that first with the executive, the kind of policies that they're churning out that are exclusionary. Look at the healthcare policies. Look at how education has gone down the drain. And these are things, tangible issues that the Gen Zs were talking about. They're talking about the experience, how their parents are struggling. They would want government to actually supplement education so that their struggling parents don't have to struggle. And this is the country that their parents are being heavily taxed. They're talking about SHIF and how, payments have come up, yet services have reduced, that the government is out to just make money. Even right at the heart of when all this satisfaction, the CS announces that cancer screening will only be for over 55. Cancer comes at every age. We've had cases of people in their 20s getting cancer.
Children get cancer.
Yeah, children get cancer. So if you're saying that only over 55 will access cancer screening, what are you telling them? Everyone should look for a private cover, yet pay higher health services. They're talking about how the economy cannot work. Even people who are trying to set up businesses, a lot of them are making money on the online platform. So when government wants to lodge heavier taxes on that, so meaning they'll make almost nothing because most are unemployed. So this is their hope that they can launch themselves, because in other countries, they're able to have multi-million dollar industry develop. But the problem, the kind of policies that government is executive is giving is killing the nascent industries, yet going out to welcome other industries to come. You give them tax haven of 5 years. 5 years comes, they've left the country. Yet the very internal industries that are supposed to go are struggling and closing down. Let's go to Parliament. Parliament, I think, is the greatest disappointment. This is the worst Parliament we're not even 2 years yet. I've never seen a more callous, irresponsible Parliament than this one, who are not reading. They dare tell the people that the bill was as big as a Bible. How can I read all of that? They asked questions. They do not understand even the subject of what you're talking about, yet you're supposed to sit in Parliament. We have members of Parliament who only appear to vote once or twice in a year on very serious government bills. Yes, people, we have never seen in history the head of state calling Parliament to agree on things, then you see the latter being announced in Parliament. You know, even when they were agreeing on some of the concessions before the rejection of the finance bill, it was done it was done together as a party. Then it was announced in Parliament. This is highly irresponsible, showing there's no independent Parliament. We have sponges who take orders and execute. I'm sorry to say this is the most irresponsible Parliament that is not representing the people of Kenya. None are listening. And that's why when they're going back home, you're seeing the kind of retaliation. They're being chased out from their chamas. They're being chased out from their constituencies because people are still angry that you are putting a deaf ear to the pleas and cries. To the judiciary, we still have irresponsible judges and corrupt judges and magistrates. For LSK, that war is still coming for corruption. So they should not think that we are not coming for them. We are coming for them. Let's deal with the issues that we're having right now. But if you have judges and magistrates that do not see the challenges that are there, and I thank the criminal division, they sat through long hours to listen and hear till almost 11 p.m. some of the accused persons that were purposely brought late by the OCS in Central Police Station. And, you know, that kind of frustration. But irrespective of that, the judges, the clerks, they sat through the night to ensure that all those matters were heard and issued orders and signed those orders. So I commend that work that they did and the sacrifice they're making for Kenyans. But as long as we still have bad apples, I'm still challenging the Chief Justice. She must either shape up or shape out, because it is quite important that people should start believing in institutions. If people are losing hope even in the judiciary, then people will go back to the streets. Because if people at this particular plight already showing for a finance bill, they are ready to die. I remember one of the ladies in a church said she'd rather die standing than live on her knees. These are strong statements coming from our younger generation. So if people don't believe that courts can give them justice, people will go and get their own justice. And this is a wake-up call, particularly to the judiciary, that when the next election comes, if they do not shape and put their act together, no one will be coming to file petitions. People will be on the streets fighting. And so we need to regain that trust in the judiciary.
Well, you took something else to the judiciary, and that was basically asking the court to hold or to stay the order on asking that KDF be deployed. What was the reasoning? What was the rationale behind that?
Well, the judge, which we respect his decision, and I respectfully disagree, that his position was that what happened on Tuesday amounted to an emergency because The office of the Chief Justice was broken into, the Supreme Court, and as well as Parliament. So that necessitated an emergency. And irrespective of bringing out the fact that constitutional elements were not met, he proceeds to give them leeway to go and gazette a new gazette and also give guidelines, and that you will leave the file open. You know, if you felt the mood even of people in that in that forum, over 1,000 Kenyans were filled to the brim watching that decision. And first of all, the decision kept being pulled back, bringing again that anxiety when people are saying phone calls are being received. So the thing of pushing the ruling then from one link to another, in fact, I was not able to enter the final link because there was no access. But the fact is that the rumor that we are waiting for your decision and people are dying. People are being killed. And yet you're sitting pretty, we are waiting for your decision. And so I think the judiciary needs a wake-up call. And I remember something stuck that the judge said, that on one hand is protection of life and property, on the other hand is the right to picket. And I asked myself, I wanted to stop him and ask, which life are you talking about? Are people shooting each other? Are protesters shooting each other? Are protesters launching tear gas canisters against each other? So you can't tell me that the police and the Kenya Defence Forces are protecting life. They're actually the ones taking life. So if those are part of your thinking and parameters, then I'm sorry. And as much as I may respectfully disagree, it's the decision of the court and we have to abide by it. But I say that it's like our courts are also living in a different world, as opposed to the world that people are living in. And maybe when it happens to one of their people is when it'll hit home that you need to protect. And I say this is a very dangerous precedent that is setting, that when the government deems that something has happened, that it's an emergency, then they can deploy and everything can be, the rest, the legal issues can follow after.
Follow later. What was the main contention? What was LSK's contention? And I still feel that you still have the same contention.
You see, our contention was that before you deploy, there are procedures that you ought to follow. They ought to have come under Article 241 3C. And that is what they tried to do after the fact.
What does it say?
Well, Article 42.3.1c talks about before deployment, you have to go to Parliament for approval. And after, in fact, there's a declaration by the CS, there's an imminent issue, there's a mutiny, or there's an unrest that needs to be dealt with. 2, you go to Parliament for approval. Parliament gives you parameters and you report regularly to Parliament. What we have is a carte blanche that the army has. They can go anywhere in the country, anytime. There's no limitation. Secondly, you do not know how many have been deployed and what are their ranks, what are their terms of reference. All of those things are not known, and how they will be reporting to Parliament. What we saw was parliamentarians rushing and approving in 30 minutes, and it wasn't even a full house. It's like the executive agreed, we're going to do this, so make sure you're here by this time, record time, that is.
So there was an emergency?
According to the courts, there was an emergency. And, our argument was that this cannot be construed as an emergency. A country that has all the apparatus of security would be able to see the escalation that was growing, unless this was purposely organized to ensure, let things happen so that they can deploy the army. Because you can't tell me it was a surprise to all these security agencies that we're having in this nation.
Actually, I tend to agree with that judge. There was an emergency, but I think he missed a step. The emergency was when the power of the citizenry was usurped by Parliament, when they were being told, and the public was outside the doors of Parliament saying, we don't want this bill, and they proceeded to pass it. That was the emergency. And the deployment should have taken place, but the deployment should have been policemen going to arrest the members of Parliament, because they had clearly broken the law. The sovereign had spoken. The sovereign had said, but they completely ignored what their bosses were saying, contrary to the law. So yes, we understand the judgment, but that particular justice missed the point. The focus should have been on the legislators who decided to ignore, because it's the ignoring of what their bosses were telling them, the sovereign was telling them, that has put us in this uncomfortable position we find ourselves in right now.
Are the right words emergency or unrest? Because even the part of the Constitution that we are quoting here, 241 3C, is that the defense forces may be deployed to restore peace in any part of Kenya if affected by unrest or instability, only with the approval of the National Assembly.
So what they did is that they came under B, saying that it's an emergency. There are two terms there. So they came under emergency, that this was an emergency.
So B says, let me just read B, that the defense forces shall assist and cooperate with other authorities in situations of emergency or disaster and report to the National Assembly whenever deployed in such circumstances.
You see, if you're reporting to the National Assembly, meaning there ought to have been an oversight. And to get that oversight, you must seek approval. So everything was done after the fact. So they were deployed. So according to the learned judge's reasoning, that at that particular point, there was an emergency and there was need to immediately deploy, and then the rest could follow. And that's why I say it's a very dangerous precedent, because it means that this can be whipped out every time, that this is an emergency, this is an unrest, and we have judicial precedent agreeing with us. So you're setting a very dangerous precedent that can be used continuously, and we can have a state that is ruling the nation by use of fear, using the army. You know, seeing the kind of the army trucks that was on the streets yesterday, I'm like, is this a movie that we're watching next to? You're seeing University of Nairobi, they're there in the heart of the city center, they're there. Even if you have so much bravery, man, seeing someone in a tank, they have machine gun this side and the other side. There's so much braveness that someone can express.
Where does it lead? And I think this is the question for lots of folks who wake up today. And this is right here, who wake up today and have lost loved ones. Yesterday, I mean, it breaks my heart into 1,000 pieces that we see children
being shot.
And of course, we still do not know the exact details of what occurred in Githurai night before last. We don't know what happened. But where does it all lead when folks are asking for legal redress, where folks are asking for what kind of prosecution will take place? We know for a fact that those who were killed the other day were killed by police. Where does it all lead? From a legal point of view, what can be done? Where do you go? Who do you ask and say, my child has been killed, what did they do? Where do we go from a legal point of view in this country where things just seem to be floating in the air? Nothing is landed right now.
Well, what we want to do is try and collect data of all these people who lost their loved ones, and we will table the same before IPOA and also demand that the Director of Public Prosecutions ensures investigations are done. The same zeal that is issuing charges on protesters is the same zeal he should use to proffer charges to the rogue policemen. So that is an expectation that will charge upon him on behalf of the people of Kenya, and we will expect him to exercise the same vigor and to ensure that justice is done to these families. Under my watch as LSK, we will not allow these victims to be swept away. We have seen previous mandamanos where people's issues are swept away. No one is talking about. You see, Bipendo only became a big issue because FIDA Kenya took it up. They prosecuted the police officers and further sued the state for compensation of the victims. And I hope, because the head of state said that they would account, that we will not need to go to court to ensure that the compensation are done for the victims that have suffered. So many are in hospitals. You know, yesterday it broke my heart to see, was it in Rongai, a child or two are shot. Seeing, I don't know if it was a father or family member, they're all sitting in a piki trying to rush this child to hospital, and the child was shot, I think, how many times at the back?
Yeah.
You know, there are things that are unexplainable.
Too far. Is there any avenue, Faith, for accountability or demand for accountability legally from the National Police Service as an institution, from the Cabinet Secretary in charge of Interior as an office over what we saw. The fact that there were police officers who used live ammunition.
You know,
Whether
we've
it-
even
whether it
done a
killed
letter
people or
of
not.
complaint.
Is there anything that can you prosecute that and say they actually went against what's expected of them in the law?
Yeah. We'll be filing a suit on command responsibility on all the seniors who are in charge and in command, because most of these policemen take orders from above. They would not shoot to kill if they have not been given orders to shoot to kill, because we have seen that consistently developing. So those must be orders that they have been given. And if they're saying they're rogue, then they should profile them for prosecution. So if the DPP refuses, then we can try and launch private prosecution, but we will still sue for compensation for those victims, because what has happened is a painful experience. And my question even is, as we go along, what next? Because the grievances are still there. The reason why people are still gathering to go to the streets is because they feel they're still being ignored. Yes, the finance bill is the first step, but they still feel there are underlying issues that need to be dealt with, that need to be tabled. And the problem is, after these abductions, most people are not comfortable coming to sit down, because they feel that after that you shall be marked.
Yeah.
And the next thing you'll be also, people will be looking for you everywhere.
Yeah.
So we need to start having a change, and that change can only happen when you first have justice for these victims. Then
Now that the police are denying that they did not abduct anyone,
yeah.
so how can we seek justice for victims of torture?
You know, the ones who are able to come out, then we'll ask them to file petitions and seek redress, because indeed they were abducted. The kind of harrowing experiences they had can only be done by the police. And the fact that they were returned unarmed, some with warnings and instructions, some frightening them to either disappear, that's a very clear show that indeed it was by the police. So we will sue for the ones who are ready to come out, because the challenge is most are not willing, and you need someone to support an application saying this is what they went through. This is how their constitutional rights were violated, and hopefully the courts to make a declaration to avoid this happening again. And maybe if the courts are more proactive and take a very clear and hard stance, then we'll be able to see some level of progress of protection of the Bill of Rights in this country.
As you're taking all this action, are you doing this pro bono?
Yes.
Is the Law Society just doing this
is
for public
totally
good?
pro bono. In fact, the painful part sometimes is that you have to try and fundraise, because, you know, the victims that were arrested, in fact, the 56, they don't have money to pay their bail.
Yeah.
So you end up now reaching further into your pocket to ensure that you set them free, because you don't want them staying in the cells for another day, another night. Yeah.
Faith, we